Welcome to the Pan Am Podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. Welcome back. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a non-profit organization. Our mission statement is to educate, celebrate, and inspire present and future generations by preserving historical and diverse personal stories of Pan American World Airways. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. We would love to meet you when you visit our museum on Long Island, which is just a short distance away from New York City. In this episode, we'll be talking about Pan Am's famous flying boat clippers, particularly the Boeing 314, which ruled the skies in the late 1930s. Later, we will be joined by Margaret O'Shaughnessy of our sister museum, the Foynes Flying Boat and Maritime Museum, which has the only full-scale replica in the world of a Pan American Boeing 314 called the Yankee Clipper. A link to this museum can be found in the episode description. She will also tell us about the origins of Irish coffee and its unique connection to Pan Am history, along with a conversation about Hollywood legend Maureen O'Hara and her storybook romance with Pan Am captain Charlie Blair, a love story fit for the silver screen. But first, let's dive into Pan Am's celebrated flying boat clippers. Throughout the 1930s, Pan Am's determination to span the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans kept the airline in an almost constant state of flux. Although the most famous design of this period was the Boeing 314, it was not the first flying boat. Two other companies, the Sikorsky Aircraft Company and the Glenn L. Martin Company, both built earlier flying boats used in Pan Am's fleet in the 1930s. Sikorsky built Pan Am's first four-engine flying boats, the S-40 in 1931 and the S-42 in 1934, followed by Martin's M-130 China Clipper and her two sister ships, which inaugurated trans-Pacific service in 1935. The airline was constantly pursuing new aircraft models with more range, developing procedures to cope with weather, sea condition forecasting for long-range flights, and providing maintenance and logistical support in remote areas around the world. By 1941, Pan American Airways was a decade ahead of the United States Department of War as far as technology and airbase operations. When war broke out, Pan Am was instrumental in helping the American government catch up and develop their air power into a formidable force. In fact, even before the war, Pan Am was the government's chosen instrument. For example, during the 1930s, the Roosevelt administration asked the airline to spy on Japanese naval movements in the Pacific. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Japanese orchestrated a coordinated attack on Pearl Harbor, American bases, and Pan Am bases where its employees were either killed or captured as prisoners of war. More about this in a future episode. The Boeing 314 flying boat was initially built exclusively for Pan Am and was hailed as the greatest pre-war commercial aircraft. Launched in the summer of 1938, the 314 was the largest long-range aircraft of its time and would later become an important part of the war effort. Boeing would only make a total of 12 of these aircraft between 1938 and 1941, with 9 going to Pan Am and the other 3 to British Overseas Airways Corporation, or more commonly known as BOAC. The 314 was the only flying boat large enough to span the Pacific and Atlantic routes with a sufficient payload. The airplane consisted of a double-decker fuselage with wings large enough to accommodate a catwalk for the engineer to inspect the rear of the engines while in flight. The flight crew consisted of a pilot and a co-pilot, supported by a navigator, radio operator, and a flight engineer, all operating on a well-lighted flight deck 19 feet long and 10 feet wide. The interior passenger cabin was configured with spacious comfort in mind, and was both expansive and luxurious. The plane included lounges, a dining room, private staterooms, and sleeping berths. The crew also consisted of celebrated chefs that prepared delicious meals that could have easily been served in any five-star restaurant. Elegant 5- and 6-course meals served in gleaming silver service by white-coated stewards delivered a standard of luxury on Pan American's B314 that has rarely been matched since. Flying boat captains took on a celebrity status among passengers and local peoples in faraway destinations. Pan Am founder and chairman Juan Trippe recognized this lofty status and gave flying boat captains the official title of Master of Ocean Flying Boats. These pilots took on an almost godlike status, and Pan Am crews referred to them as sky gods. The crews were not only considered sky gods by their colleagues, but by pilots of other airlines too, and there was a reason for this. Pan Am crews were extremely skilled at long-distance over-water flight operations and celestial navigation. Only the very best and most experienced were assigned to fly the Boeing 314. Extensive training and flying thousands of hours of flight time in other seaplanes was mandatory. Even the way they looked was all by design. Pan Am viewed its flight crew as sailors of the sky and modeled their rank and uniforms in a very military way patterned after the United States Navy. The flight crew, dressed in their naval uniforms complete with white caps, would always walk to and from the aircraft in unison to make a striking appearance. The high standards of training, experience, and appearance were all due to the disciplines instilled in them by Pan Am's chief engineer, Andre Priester. Priester was a taskmaster and insisted on procedural compliance to all the standards he established. He stamped the airline with his own ethic of hard-nosed, conservative, safety-minded, meticulously planned operations. It was Priester who laid down the specifics for each of Pan Am's new flying boats. He plotted new routes and wrote operation manuals and calculated aircraft performance. Priester invented Pan Am's operational philosophy that would forever reshape the entire aviation industry to this day. The naval rank and uniform for pilots quickly became the standard aviation tradition among other airlines. So today, when you see a pilot in uniform at the airport, you'll now know that started all with Pan Am. The Pan Am Museum has a permanent exhibit that explores the Boeing 314 in more detail. Margaret O'Shaughnessy is the managing director of the Foynes Flying Boat and Maritime Museum. Hailed as one of Ireland's finest tourism ambassadors, Margaret was instrumental in developing the museum what it is today. If it were not for her vision and dedication, along with the museum's benefactor, Maureen O'Hara, the museum and replica Pan Am B314 flying boat would not be a reality. She was awarded the highest civilian honor by her local government in 2018 for her years of work and dedication at the museum. Joining us from County Limerick, Ireland, it is a great pleasure to welcome Margaret to the Pan Am podcast. Hi there.
Hi, Thomas. Lovely to hear from you, and it's delighted to be on your podcast tonight.
First of all, thank you for joining us. This has been your life's work for almost 35 years. When you look back at it, and it all started in 1987. What memories stand out for you?
Oh my, there are so many. Let's try and condense it a little for you. I suppose the opening day on the 8th of July 1989 has to be the starting one anyway. because while I started to try and put a group together, try and get a premises, all the things that you have to do, try to find some memorabilia and people to support us financially, all that started in 87. And we had a very little short time frame because we were faced with a very special anniversary, which was the 50th anniversary of Pan Am crossing the Atlantic with passengers in 89. So that was the date we had to get started for. So that day stands totally out in my mind because Pan Am were still in the skies. We had, I would say, several hundred Pan Amers join us for the celebrations. We had the Vice President of Pan Am, and Mr. Murphy, I can't remember his first name now. And we had our patron, or who became our patron, the one and only Maureen O'Hara Blair, to cut the ribbon with the American ambassador. So that has to be one of the highlights.
Great.
After that, there are so many, Thomas, of all the different people coming from around the world to visit us, to make friends with us, support us. And if I may say at the very beginning, without the enormous support we got from many, many Americans, our museum would not be there today. So that's one. And I suppose every year there's a little highlight when somebody nice comes through the door.
So tell us about your museum there.
Well, I suppose when I started the museum, I didn't come from a museum background. I came from a banking background, but I lived in this small village. And as a child, my grandfather was a coal merchant. He used to deliver firewood, coal, and he was a great horseman. And he had worked on the flying boats for the airport. And we used to often hear him talking about airways. But we were too small. We didn't know what it meant. But in later life, we began to realise that this tiny village in rural Ireland had a very special place in world history for travel. And that was that it was Ireland's first international airport and the first transatlantic airport in Ireland, connecting our two wonderful countries. So I love history. I had been working with the group for community developments, and I have no idea. I'd be telling a lie if I said I had this sudden moment when I said it must be. I have no idea where it came from. But I did meet a great local official in government, and he said to me, "You've done a lot of fundraising and promotion to build a sports complex in the village, which we had. What are you going to do now?" And I just said, "Oh, I suppose a museum about," and he said, "About what?" And I said, "Flying boats." Now, Thomas, I didn't know the back of a flying boat from the front of a flying boat, or what it did, or how it operated, or who operated. I knew nothing. So, but I suppose I'm determined. And if I set myself a goal, nothing will get in the way. So it started off like that. And by 1989, we had, just to shorten this, we had acquired 4 outhouses with mud floors and cobbles. That's all they were. There were storage rooms in the building that was originally the airport building. I had secured funding from a wonderful man called Dr. Tony Ryan, who set up the Ryanair airline, which is a major airline in Europe. He had given us £50,000. I got some money from the government, and I had got a few guys behind me who said, "Yeah, we'll support you, not financially, but we'll come on a board of directors, you know, the usual." And we got cracking and got a very good historian to work on it. And then I did, I suppose, a crazy thing. I got, I think it was Delta and Air Canada between them. I took off on this mission, and I went to New York. I went out to Long Island. I went out to anywhere that had a connection with flying boats. And there was very few people around, I suppose, the New York area. I went from there up to Shediac, New Brunswick. I went from there up to Botwood, Newfoundland. So they were all the connections on the route, and started chatting to people and got some insights. So came back and we got a builder in, and we opened on the 8th of July, 89, which was the 50th anniversary. So it was crazy times, wonderful times. And we started with 3 staff and opened the door with, I suppose, no great design or ambitions that this was going to become what it is today. And it's an amazing story, really it is.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Foynes and walk us through your museum?
Well, the history is that, I suppose, by Irish standards, Foynes would be a new village. It came into major being 1700s. That's new in Ireland. It was a commercial port. When I say that now, not the ports we have today, it was a timber harbour jetty, things like that. But it had trading on the river. It had a rail line from 1860. It had what was to become the airport terminal was a hotel called the Monteagle Arms Hotel, because there was an estate, an English estate, that owned most of the property, and that was Lord Monteagle. And when Pan Am decided, and that wonderful man won trip, and Lindbergh went off on his magical mystery tours to see where they could fly to. He looked at Foynes, he looked at Galway, Cork, all different places. But I suppose we had a few things going for us. We had deep water, a sheltered bay, train service, bus service, and all the major oil companies, Shell, Esso, BP, had terminals in Foynes where they imported their oil. So a lot of those factors would have helped to get us to be chosen. And once they decided it was Foynes, then everything started. The first Irish Met service or weather service began in Foynes. First radio communications came in. We've so many first airmails later on went from Foynes. And as you know, the first passenger flights. So the village was one long street. And of course, then that's when all the fun started, Thomas. Do you want a funny story?
Of course.
There was Pan Am and there was Imperial Airways. And they eventually signed an agreement to divide the Atlantic between them. They were trying to be one better than the other. But the British also got the contract of running the actual ground operations at the airport. And then all these people moved in. So what do you do with them? There's no hotels, no guest houses, no B&Bs, nothing. A lot of the women in the village decided this was a rare opportunity to make some money. And they started getting the spare bedrooms all done up and prepared to take in people. And then they started getting notions, as we say in Ireland, about their standing. And they all started hanging out these signs. And you had, oh my God, the names were hilarious. The Crystal Palace Hotel, these kind of names, and probably one room to rent. But one woman was really cute, and she called it the Unida Hotel. UNEEDA, Unida Hotel. And I mean, there are stories abounding after that when people came. I have wonderful diaries from some of the staff that their families have given me, where they learned to fish, they learned to go swimming, they boating, sailing. They went to Irish Céilís, which are Irish dances. They had a most wonderful time here. Lots of marriages. Guys moved in, met an Irish girl, married her. So you've all that kind of lovely background away from the airport even. But as you know, Pan American and Imperial later changed their name to BOAC, both started in 1989. The trial flights were 87, 88, 89. We started our passenger flights. And from that up to October 1945, a guy called Captain Charlie Blair took the last scheduled flight on the North Atlantic, and Pan Am took a last flight out, I think, to Portugal later than that. And we had a few charters after that. The war had hastened the demise, I suppose, of flying boats and brought land planes along in their design and everything. And we were no more, which was very sad. And all this history had been totally lost. There wasn't even, a plaque on a wall to say this all happened. So that was my intention, was that this history would be saved, that people in the future, many years from now, would still be able to come and learn about Pan Am, about the passenger flights, about the role our small village played in helping people unite around the world.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about your museum?
Well, as I said, it started in 4 rooms, a little cinema with 32 seats, and 2 exhibition rooms and a reception. And gradually over the years, we managed to get the port company to give us another bit of room, another bit. Eventually, just to tell your listeners, by 2002, we purchased the entire building. and then had the job, and I'll go through it then with you, had the job of reconstructing what had been taken down and taken away, the control tower and the floor underneath it. So we put the building back into the exact shape it was in, and the functions it had in the 40s. Right through that time. So when you come in, now it's difficult at the minute because I've just said to you, we're starting a 4.5 million development. So the layout will change a little if people come later on. But at the moment, we have a reception area, and then we take you in and we have a 15-minute black and white movie, which takes you through the pate newsreels, the whole history, the interviews, all of that. So you get a grounding in the history of what went on. And then we have this glorious room filled with memorabilia, Pan American memorabilia. You must remember there was American export as well, and American overseas. So there's bits of that, but Pan Am would be the predominant one. And then we have an original radio and weather room with Marconi transmitters, Morse keys, all of that. And then we go into the airlines rooms, and in there we have a very large model of the layout of the airport, because I think people don't understand. You have to keep explaining they could only land on water, not on the runways. And you also have to show that how did they operate right through the war? And we show this because of security and safety. They always left Foynes very late at night, and they always arrived into Foynes from the United States early in the morning. But when they were taking off, Thomas, I don't know if you know this or not, on the river, the pilot would go and get his how many passengers and weights and fuel and all of that information. And then he would know that he needed so long, so many hundreds of meters to get off the water. A boat with a crew would go in front of that plane and cast out to the left and to the right these special kind of lights or beacons onto the actual water to make a flare path for the flight taking off. And he'd come behind the boat and take off from that. And I remember saying to one of them, what happened if, it didn't go right? We'd just go back and do it again. So you can imagine in today's world, that's not pretty scary to hear that. So we have that room. We have lots of, oh my God, so many things. One of the precious things is Bill Masland's logbook from that very first flight, from that Pan Am flight. Bill Masland was the navigator, and we have his logbook, and that's lovely to have. We have some of the original flags that they flew on the flying boats. We have Pan Am uniforms. Madeleine Cuniff, who was a very well-known hostess, air hostess, we have her uniforms. We have, I'm just going along with my head now, we have tickets and badges and luggage tags and plates. And we actually have a lovely, lovely thing that was given to me by Ed Tripp at that Pan Am reunion, an original blanket off the B314s. And that's wonderful to have.
Fantastic.
Passenger slippers. We actually, from a British flight, just for the fun of it, tell you, we have this beautiful tin, and there's a fruitcake inside in it that nobody ever asked for and it was never opened. So I wouldn't care to open the tin now, but anyway, the fruitcake is still in there. And of course, you must remember as well, passengers in those days had to be either VIPs, war effort, movie stars, royalty. So we have all those kind of lists and things like that, passenger lists. And then we have what I call a memory room. And the memory room is lovely because it's taken from the diaries of Dave Davenport, who was Pan Am traffic. It's taken from, there was Dave and Brendan Regan, who was in operations over the whole restaurant area, Dave Davenport and Bob Dowley. And they were all Pan Am people, and their families have so kindly given us their diaries. And we've taken lots of bits from them and we have them on display, along with passenger records and then intelligence files. Because remember, when I do interviews over here and they ask me, describe Foynes. Well, I said during the war, it was Casablanca. Because if you, for instance, a lot of Jewish refugees were brought to Foynes for safety from Europe, and they waited in Foynes in safety until passage could be given on flights to America. And quite a few of them have come back. So there's that kind of side of it as well, which is
that's great.
Fleeing refugees are nothing new to us even today. But
So you failed to mention the Boeing 314 replica, the Yankee
I'm
Clipper.
coming to it. I didn't get to it yet. When you've gone through the memory room and there's a children's room where we flight sims and all that, because it's important that the kids know all about it as well. And then we come, which our prized possession, a full-scale, 100% authentic B314 replica. And now that is a story in itself, Thomas.
Oh, please share.
Yeah, I visited Boeing many years ago, and they were very good to me. And at that time, you could freely get lots of photographs of interiors. All of that's quite different now. And I got blueprints. And my one thing that bothered me always was people came to visit a flying boat museum without a flying boat. And we did have one briefly, and the owner changed his mind, and it's now in Florida. But a guy called Kermit Weeks owns it, but it wasn't a 314. So there's this amazing guy called Bill Fallover, who is an Englishman living in Ireland for many years, but he builds movie sets and all that kind of imaginary stuff, and he's gifted. And my historian again said to me, we'll go talk to him, ask him, would he build you a cabin showing just the beds, the night configuration and that. And we asked Bill, and he said, not, you think about it. And he came back and he said, no. And we said, why? All or nothing, he said. I'll still remember it. And I said, you're a lunatic. We can't build all or nothing. And I said, what would it cost? I have no idea, he said. It's never been done, in these times. So I went away, and as I told you, I am terrible for getting something into my head. So I approached our Minister for Culture and Arts at the time, called Minister John O'Donoghue. And I said to him, I was doing an extension as well. Sorry, I missed out. We were doing an extension anyway. So I went to him about the extension first, and we got 1 million euros. And then Bill said, all or nothing. And I said, what'll it cost? I don't know. So I said, would 500,000 do it? And he said, probably. So I went back to my minister and I said, we have this opportunity, which is really a rare opportunity with this gifted man to build this. And I showed him, photographs and whatever. I said, but I need another 500,000. And believe it or not, Thomas, he gave it to me.
Wow, that's great.
Bill Fallover started building. Then we had terrible trouble to try and get authentic materials. We got all the materials spun specially from tiny little samples people sent us. And it worked out in more than 500,000. But anyway, we got it. He brought it in sections by night, by road from up near Dublin where he built it. And we have a video or a DVD now of all of it. And it went into place, and there it is sitting on its own pond of water. And people are mesmerized by it. And we get emails and everything. People say, I visited your museum. Will you settle an argument? Does it fly? Is it real? Or is it a replica or a model? They can't tell,
That's
and
great.
We've had 1 or 2 funerals for pilots on it. They've brought the ashes, and we've had some ceremonies on board.
So how does that feel? I mean, you were behind all of this. How does that make you feel?
Well, it takes more than one person. I'm there to kind of push it on all the time, but I've had fantastic support from the Irish government of different colours, because in the long time I'm there, my God, 33, 34 years, I've had several governments and I have to deal with several different ministers. And we've been fortunate, and we have, when I set up the company, Thomas, I set it up as a registered charity and a not-for-profit organisation. I didn't want to financially gain from it, and I didn't want anybody else that anything it would make would go back in to doing more, improving it and giving employment. And that's what we've done. So that has helped, and we've been able to set ourselves up recently as a 501 a charity in America as well. So the plane is certainly the highlight of anyone's visit. I mean, when you're driving through the street of Foynes, can you imagine you're passing out a building, and the next thing, this big 3 prongs of a tail of a plane is sitting on the roadside. And people, you can see the cars, and they're stopping suddenly and looking if they don't know about it. It's a showstopper, and it's wonderful. And then also when our visitors go out, open the double doors to go out of the building, which is at the back, and this massive American flag hits them in the face, It's fabulous. And on the wall, we tell the history of all the 314s. And of course, I reckon it was the first Air Force One, because it took the president down to meet Churchill and all that. So that's it. But of course, since then, we've moved on and we've built a Maritime Museum, which partly cuts across the flying boats as well. And then people go up into the control tower. And they love to go up into the control tower. It's a shame we don't have the equipment for the control tower, but they can go and they go outside and walk around, and they can see the whole estuary where everything happened.
Tell us about Irish coffee and its relationship with Pan Am.
Everything in Ireland happens around weather. And a Pan Am flight took off in October 1943 for New York. Now, every flight leaving Foynes or every flight leaving New York, if they hit dreadful, dreadful weather on the Atlantic, the pilot had the decision, keep going or go back. And on this particular night, he made the decision that it was too bad and he'd turn back. So my grandfather's job, as I mentioned him previously, working for the airport, because he was a great horseman, he would be called and he'd be told, the flight is returning. It'll be here again in 3 or 4 hours or whatever the time frame will be. Go out now and call in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the different staff we now need. When the passengers come, they'll be frozen, tired, and we need to feed them. There was a wonderful restaurant in the airport. And that was his job. We called him the Paul Revere of Foynes. So that's what happened. And the chef and the staff were brought in. The chef was an unusual guy. He was from Northern Ireland, and his name was Joe Sheridan. And the flight came back, and the passengers were brought up to the airport terminal and to the restaurant to be fed and to get some liquids. And there was what we think was the guy was an American diplomatic courier, Mr. Carter, from the best of our research. And the ground hostess for Pan Am was Lal Dowley, who only died last year. She lived in Martha's Vineyard. And she took them in and she said to Joe, they're frozen. Will you just give them something special? And Joe had been tinkering around. So he just gave them the coffee, but he put Powers whiskey into it and gave it out to them. And we have a hologram that you go into, and you can see all this reenacted.
That's
and
neat.
Carter said, my God, Joe, he said, this is lovely. What is it? It was a Brazilian coffee you used. And Joe, being smart, said not at all. It was Irish. I mean, we don't grow coffee in Ireland, as you know. So that's where it started. And a few days later, Joe put it into a glass as we know it today. And as I said, the man in charge of the restaurants here was a wonderful man called Brendan O'Regan, who said always to his staff when they were preparing food, it must have eye appeal. And Sheridan went down, he knocked on O'Regan's door and he opened the door. He said, boss, how about that for eye appeal? And Brendan O'Regan said, genius, chef. Irish coffee was accepted as a welcoming drink in Foynes and later in the new land plane. But Joe Sheridan had a great history in that a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle came to Ireland in 1951 and was given Irish coffees and went back to the Buena Vista in San Francisco and said, Mr. Coppler, who owned it, this is a wonderful drink. We should try making it. And they tried, it just wasn't right. They came back and they offered Joe a job in San Francisco and he immigrated and started the whole thing of Irish coffee in the United States in the Buena Vista. And he's buried in Oakland Cemetery and we've been to his grave. And it says, here lies the inventor of the world's greatest drink, Irish coffee.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful drink.
You can find the link to the original recipe for Foynes Irish coffee in the episode description. We're going to take a quick break with a Pan Am commercial from 1982.
In 1935, only one airline, Pan Am, stood poised on the edge of America, ready to challenge the Pacific. And today, the mighty clippers of Pan Am rise majestically from 6 continents for the far corners of the world. Where will we fly to next? Well, we've been thinking.
You can't beat the experience.
Welcome back to our interview with Margaret O'Shaughnessy from the Foynes Flying Boat and Maritime Museum in Ireland. You mentioned the late Maureen O'Hara is the museum's benefactor. Can you tell us more about her impact and also her romance with Pan Am Captain Charlie Blair?
Well, when I was starting the museum, Pan American were still flying into Shannon Airport. And Trevor Lewis was the manager for Pan Am there at the time. So naturally, I had conversations with Trevor and with his PR people. And they said to me, really, you should talk to Maureen O'Hara. So younger viewers or listeners, I should say, mightn't know her. But I mean, she was a big, big star. And I was terrified of going to have to talk to Maureen O'Hara. But they gave me her phone number and said, call her. And I kind of thought about this for a while and eventually said, look, I better do it. So I called her and I told her I was from Foynes. I didn't get past that when she said, oh my God, it's lovely to talk to you. Once I said Foynes. So I explained to her what I was trying to do, the madness of it and all the rest. And I'm thinking about it. And she said, stop thinking about it and do it. So from then on, we had communication several times. I remember she walked the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York the following year, and she told the world to come to Ireland. There was a new museum going to open. So she used her image and her profile in the media to promote us at every chance. So we asked her then, would she become patron of the museum and would she officially open it? She said yes. Now, the reasons for all of this wasn't because we were a movie set or anything like that. It was because she was married to Captain Charles Blair, one of the top pilots before flying boats and during flying boats. And he was one of your top pilots in Pan Am. Maureen didn't ever fly into Foynes in a flying boat. People often say that, no, because she wasn't flying boats. She didn't know, I should say, Charlie Blair at that time. He was a friend of her brother's, is how she met him. But they got married and in 1968, and they were only married for 10 years, unfortunately, when he was killed in an accident in a flying boat down the Caribbean. She retired from movies when she married him. He retired from Pan Am, and they set up Antilles airboats in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. And she went down there and she wrote the magazine for the islands, and she was kind of around, and Charlie ran the airline. But one thing they did, Charlie flew the last commercial flight on the North Atlantic out of Foynes, and he went up over the street and dipped his wings to say goodbye. But he was the favourite pilot at the time coming into Foynes, and the locals liked him. He'd have a pint with them. He was just one of these guys, you know, that had an image and could chat to guys and all of this. So when he bought Sandringhams, one in Australia, two in Australia, he decided he would fly back. And Maureen's article in our museum says, last to go and first to come back. So in 1976, he came back to Foynes in a flying boat with Maureen and all his extended family. That would have been the first time I would have seen the two of them together. And there were thousands upon thousands of people on the pier to see them land and see this amazing flying boat land and see this Maureen O'Hara movie star. And I'll always remember I got married in 75, and in 76 I would have been 22, standing at the back of hundreds and hundreds of people trying to get a glimpse by going on my tippy toes to see Maureen O'Hara. Little did I ever think I would get her much closer than that. So he was killed in 78, so he didn't get the chance to come back anymore. Sorry.
We have an interview clip with Ms. O'Hara from Irish TV in 1989. Let's take a listen.
Your husband, Charlie Blair, Lord Reston, was probably the most famous pilot in the entire world.
Yes,
Senior
indeed he
Pan
was.
Am captain, transatlantic for years and years, Air Force pilot, all of that. And you ran your lovely little airline in the Virgin Islands.
Well, it wasn't little.
Wasn't a little airline, was
No,
it?
we had 26 planes and 22 pilots.
Oh, I didn't realise
Oh,
it was
yes.
that big.
We were the bus line of the Caribbean.
And
We had a flight every 3 minutes.
Where'd you get all those flying boats, for God's sake?
Charlie Blair found them. No matter where you hid them, he found them.
I didn't realise
Oh,
you
yes.
that many. God,
Yes.
that's a big
Oh, no,
airline.
it was a big airline and made a great deal of money.
And is that all finished now? Did you?
Yes. When Charlie died, to prove a point, I ran the airline for 2 years for him. and I was the first woman to be president of an airline in the United States of America. And I sold the airline to Resorts International, the big gambling concern in the United States. And now they eventually closed it down, which is a very long story. When I write the story of my life, I'll write all about it. But let me tell you, Charlie was not only a great man, he was a great pioneer pilot, the greatest in the world, but he was a gorgeous man and a wonderful man. And in Foynes, when he used to bring in the seaplanes, the local people, the villagers, used to call him the God who walks, and he was.
Maureen was on, I suppose, the biggest TV show we have in Ireland with the late Gay Byrne, who was our top interviewer, I should say. And she was on talking about Charlie at length. She liked nothing better than talking about Charlie Blair. She came to Foynes every year, and this would have been one of the visits when she went up to do that TV program. And her birthday was the 17th of August. So we would hold a big Irish coffee festival for those few days, and she would celebrate her birthday with us every year in Foynes. But like Charlie Blair was the first man to fly solo over the pole. You know, he holds all the records on the Atlantic in a flying boat, the 3 fastest crossings. And I mean, she absolutely adored him. And once that is her connection to Foynes, really. It was Charlie Blair's favourite little place to fly to. So for that alone, that was her connection to us. And but we became, I have to say, the best and closest of friends. We had her birthday, as I say, every year. She stayed with me, I stayed with her. And I know she reached the ripe old age in 95. And yes, she died. But God, we miss her so much because she was there for us for so long. If I rang her and said, I'm launching a box of matches next week, can you make it? If she could at all, Maureen would be home and be there for the box. And you see, Thomas, it wasn't a financial thing. It was the fact she was there. So the TV cameras came, the radio stations came. We got the promotion. We got the media profile. And that is why, I suppose now, having got, by the way, I went to her funeral in Washington, and my God, that was something else to see how they do their funerals over there. And they buried her with Charlie Blair in Arlington. And the American Air Force took out the casket, and it was something else. But after that, she had a daughter, one daughter, and that daughter had one son. So it's a very small family. And unfortunately, her daughter Bronwyn died 8 months after her. So that just left Conor, her grandson, and he made the decision that if Gran could have told him what to do with all the memorabilia, all the paperwork, everything, all the beautiful costumes and clothes and her Oscar and everything, he thought she'd want it in Foynes. So he graciously donated everything to us. We have, I'm sure you know, but The Quiet Man was a big movie with John Wayne. We have the trap from The Quiet Man. We have her clothes from The Quiet Man. And now my big challenge was to try and put 4.2 million together so that we could redesign our museum. We just couldn't kind of catch on a wing. We had to redesign. So if we redesigned and we took everything into account and made sure we got more Pan Am space. And so we're starting that actually next week. And it'll take 17 months to build. And
That's
then
great.
Yeah, that'll be the next big thing, you know, and I'm sure she'll help us out somehow up there. She used to always say that they wouldn't let her die because John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart said, don't let that woman up. But, anyway, she's joined them all now.
So I, along with many of our listeners, are probably now thinking of planning a trip to see your incredible museum. Anything more you'd like to add about the museum and the general area?
Well, we're on this wild Atlantic way, which anybody looking at Ireland will see. It's the entire west coast, and it is a huge hit, you know, with everybody in spring. What I would say is don't come for a little while more. Why do I say that? Because I want to get this wing finished so that you see the complete thing and you get to really enjoy it. And we have so much more Pan Am memorabilia that we want to put on display, and all this space will let us do that now. And then I'll be very happy to retire and leave the next generation put their input in it. But I have to say, I have the best friends all over the world through Pan American. I started out not knowing anything about museums. I wasn't a person that visited museums. But when you get to know the Pan Amers, you have to keep going. They are just something so special. And I'm privileged, I'm honoured to call some of them my friends now. And I just want some time now that I can actually take off, visit your museum in Long Island, go and see them up in Newfoundland again, because I became great friends with them all up in Newfoundland, that I can go to, all the other places that have little bits of history of Pan Am. And I'd be happy then.
Thank you so much for your time, Margaret. And I so look forward to meeting you in person when I come to visit Ireland.
We look forward to welcoming you. There is always a wonderful 100,000 welcomes, Céad Míle Fáilte, to everybody that comes. We have a special relationship, I think, always with the United States.
Excellent. Well, I enjoy having some Irish coffee with you as well.
Well, I hope now that you don't get too drunk on it, because it is it is strong, but it is beautiful.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. And with that, we're going to close out this episode with a Pan Am song from 1969 by Sammy Davis Jr. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, "Thank you for flying, Pan Am."
Leave the mail in a box, tie the hands of the clocks, hang your tears out to dry, leave your house on the fly, get away right away like today, for once in a lifetime, get into this world, let the smoke blow its stack, leave the smog and the flak, turn the rain into shine, head for cloud number 9, get away right away like today, for once in a lifetime, get into this world. Pan Am makes the going great, Pan Am makes the going great, Pan Am makes the going great.